finds that self-forgiveness and self-love before they transition, or people resist that and just...
Yeah, and well, and they will come. The quick answer is yes. Everybody comes. I'm pretty sure. Maybe there might have been one person out of the 30,000. Okay, that I wasn't quite sure. But no, and at the very, very end, and I'm talking seconds before they finally come to it, and
they surrender.
But they don't have to, and that's what they're telling me, Dr. Lerma. Spread the message that you don't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. But the good news is that yes, your body finally it really does surrender. And a good example of this was this, and I'll give you an example of these kind of messages and experiences I've seen. One of the big ones I had was early on as an intern, and that was when I was doing the ER program portion of my internship, and it was in Austin, and a lot of it was just really packed that day, and then there was this huge accident where there were some fatalities and children were involved, and so we only had a certain number of trauma rooms and a certain amount of doctors, and then after that you have to close down, and then they'll send the other one to other hospitals. So we got maxed out, and the doctors, everyone had to take care of a patient because most of them were near death, and of course it was all triage, and because I was an intern, they gave me the person that was probably either had the best chance of survival or the least chance of survival. And of course I got the person with the least chance of survival. It was a very, very old, it was an older gentleman, just a lot of problems, had a massive heart attack, and there really was no way they thought that he would survive. So, but of course I knew all the, how to revive people. So this gentleman shows up, and his wife is right outside the door to the trauma room, and he's having this heart attack. We start treating him, and then he flatlines, he dies, and then he goes into an arrhythmia. So we have to shock him. And every time I shocked him, he'd come right back. And it was like, he'd go, oh my God, and he'd say that, but in Spanish, and Spanish gentleman, and I go, of course it hurts, but of course we don't have time to numb them up. They're just dying immediately, or their heart stops. And I go, I'm sorry, it hurts. And he goes, no, it's not that. And right when he would say that, he'd go back out, and I'd shock him again, and again he'd do the same thing. Finally, after about 2 or 3 shocks, he remained conscious, and I was trying to stabilize him and trying to keep him engaged in conversation so he wouldn't be too nervous. I started asking him, hey, tell me more about what you were, what was it that you were saying? He goes, no, when you were coming back and after I shocked you, no, it wasn't the pain from the electricity. And it was, every time he shocked me, I was in the corner of the room, and I just whizzed right back into my body, and it felt like a roller coaster ride. And he used that term, that first drop. And I go, really? And so, everyone's doing their thing, but at the same time, everyone's listening to this. We've heard a lot about these things, but to really have someone telling you at that moment, whether you're real sick, it's not that common. And so I keep him engaged, and then other people start asking him more questions, and he goes, yes, I'm up, I'm out of my body, I can see, I can see all of you, and yada yada yada. And then he starts to really become really weak. We send him off to to go get cath, and they fix him up, and they send him out into the intensive care unit. The next day, in making my rounds to see all the patients I had admitted, I go first to the intensive care unit, and there's this guy just waving, and ooh, me first. And it's the gentleman that had that massive heart attack, and I'm going, oh my God, you shouldn't even be moving, let alone talking and being so clear-minded. But he was, and I moved over to his room, and he's going, I go, are you feeling okay? He goes, I've never felt better. And he had he didn't have a surgery, but he had a clot in one of his arteries, and they used his blood which we call, and they used actually medicine for that, which is really cool nowadays. And so he was fine. He got good blood flow. He looked wonderful. And he's telling me, I need to talk to you. I trusted you when I was in the room. I was telling you about things. I need to know that what happened to me was real. And I go, when you were out of your body? He goes, yes. Well, how am I supposed to prove that? And he goes, I'll tell you what. I didn't believe that I was out of my body. So I needed to look for something that I knew that you wouldn't know or anyone else in that room would not know existed or was there. So as looking around the room, I looked on top of the monitor you kept looking at, the rhythm monitor, and up there was a quarter. And it was a 1985 quarter. And he got that close to it, he said, to see that it was a 1985 quarter. It was the right lower hand corner of the monitor. There was light dust over it. The trauma room had just been built probably a year prior to that, and this gentleman had never worked really in his life, and was an alcoholic, very abusive to his family and so forth. So, I kept, thinking, well, could you have put that there? Did you work in this place? And, of course, no. Even if he did, for him to have a heart attack and then to choose to be in that same trauma room, that doesn't work that way. We choose that, And so there's no way this man could have set all this up. And so I go down there and I said, well, you know what? I'm sure he's interested. I'll go and humor this whole thing and let me go and get a ladder. So I called the guys to bring the ladder down to that trauma room and told the nurses, and some of them were there from that night before, and they were all interested to find out whether that was true or not. And so get up there, and sure enough, there it is. 1985 quarter, light film of dust, no fingerprints up there like someone was, holding on to, the monitor or whatever, or putting something up there. And it was there, just like you said, 1985 quarter. So I get down, all the nurses are going, wow, this is really bizarre. But, of course, immediately they get stormed in by another trauma victim. So, we don't have time to think about these things. And so they happen day after day, day after day, but because of the emergent status of being a physician and things, we just don't have time to talk about it or write about it. And I wanted to write about it. And so I go back and tell the patient this, and he goes, oh, my God, he just started crying, and he goes, it's true. And he goes on to tell me that he negotiated with God, and that God is just incredibly loving. All of his deceased loved ones were with him, and in fact, they were still in the room with him, he said, and that they gave him that chance. They gave him a chance to repair his self-conviction, to obtain the understanding of how to forgive himself and love himself, because God loves us anyway, but unconditionally. But if you can't love yourself, there's no way you can accept God's love or bring it into yourself. And so he was very profound for the gentleman who had no education, and that's what I've noticed on all of these patients who either have no education, little education, or are younger, that they are profound, intellectually profound and spiritually profound, and the statements they make are just, oh my gosh, they give you goosebumps. And so, this gentleman, I started asking him, well, tell me more about this. And he goes, well, I can't tell you a whole lot because it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't understand it. It's all of these processes are tailored to each individual person. But one thing I can tell you is don't worry, because they love us. The other side exists. It's out there, and when you're out of your body, you can see. And I go, I've always had that. I always had a hard time trying to explain that as a scientist. We have eyes so we can see, but how can you see when you're out of your body? And he goes, I'll tell you what. It's the same way you can see when you have a dream. And so think about that. How do we see with our dreams? We don't, and that's exactly the way it is. That's our consciousness, and it's all through experiences. And every experience that we have, if we do not provide ourselves closure with it or reconcile